Well, it's a case that we are monitoring closely here on KCMO Talk Radio, and of course that is Eric Devalkenaere's situation here, the former KCPD detective who still finds himself in prison, dating back to the Cameron Lamb case, and obviously it's been a topic of conversation in not just law enforcement circles, but obviously also now political circles as the Missouri gubernatorial primary heats up ahead of August 6th. So I'm happy to welcome on and say hello to Jason Johnson. He is the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund here on KCMO Talk Radio. And their role is really providing funding for legal defense, engaging in public advocacy. And they are leading the effort to secure clemency for Eric Devalkenaere. Jason, good morning. Thanks for being here. And take us through your involvement in this case with Eric Devalkenaere here in Kansas City.
Good morning, Pete, and thank you so much for keeping the focus on Eric's case and for inviting me to speak to it a little bit. So the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, just for your listeners' edification, we're a nonprofit organization. We're based just outside of Washington, D.C., but we have a national a mission to provide legal defense funding to law enforcement officers who have been wrongfully charged, or in this case, wrongfully convicted of a crime related to their work. And so we do that on a national basis. But I have to tell you, Pete, Eric's case, we care about all of our cases, but I think the level of injustice that's happened to Eric and his family is I won't say unprecedented, but it stands above and beyond really most of the cases that we routinely deal with on a daily basis.
Why is that?
Well, I think that, I've reviewed and looked at a lot of these cases, both in my role in leading the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, but also in my prior life as a law enforcement executive, having the opportunity to review cases of serious uses of force by law enforcement officers. And so I have a pretty good sense of, what types of cases will lead to a finding by a prosecutor that the officer's use of force is justified. Use of deadly force in this case is justified, and all of the legal requirements for a justified use of deadly force are present here. Eric faced a very difficult or even impossible situation where the life of his partner was threatened when Mr. Lamb pulled out a firearm. According to Eric's own testimony, he observed the firearm in his hand, pointed at his partner. That the use of deadly force in that situation is justified. And I'll take it a step further, Pete. In the trial of Eric's case, that really wasn't even the issue. The issue kind of got sidetracked, and the court focused instead on the Fourth Amendment issues, which was a surprise. I'll just say, just to understate it a little bit, was a big surprise to everyone that I was in contact with at the time, and other law enforcement experts around the country that I've spoken with since then. It still doesn't make sense to any of us. And it's just very frustrating, certainly for us. I can't imagine the frustration experienced by Eric and by his wife Sarah and their whole family and their friends when they know what the right answer is, but yet they're being given a different answer both by the trial court and in the Court of Appeals.
So what can you do, and what are you doing with the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund when it comes to trying to help Eric Devalkenaere and the family secure this clemency?
Well, we have three touch points here in this case, as we do with most of our cases. The first is raising money to support Eric's legal defense, which those needs are ongoing, but they've involved paying virtually, if not all, of the lawyers' legal fees and expert witnesses and other things that are required in legal defense. The second, and what we're currently most actively involved in, is really advocating on behalf of clemency. Really asking Governor Parson, and in many ways through you, asking some of the leading GOP gubernatorial candidates what their position is on extending clemency via a pardon or sentence commutation to Eric. So we're involved in that. We've been making sure that we engage our donors and supporters, the many millions. I mean, we've mailed well over 2 million pieces of mail and countless emails to supporters, asking them to sign a petition on supporting clemency for Eric. We've received back many, many thousands of those that we've transmitted to the governor's office, and we'll continue to do that. And then third is doing what I'm doing right now, which is really just being as public as possible, advocating for Eric and for Sarah via social media, traditional media, talk shows, personal contacts with influential people, particularly in Missouri, and so on. So that effort is ongoing until Eric's name has been cleared.
What do you make of just, you said this case is especially egregious compared to some of the others that you deal with. When you look at this case in particular, you alluded to it earlier, but when you go through it, as you have, and you look back on this case for Eric Devalkenaere, is there one thing that stands out to you the most in terms of how shocked you are that we got to this point?
Well, I don't know if the right way to describe it is the perfect storm, but you had a case here in the case that involved Eric and his partner, that they were in good faith following up on information and observations that they made about the conduct and the driving and the dangerous actions that were taken by Mr. Lamb. They, of course, didn't know Mr. Lamb, had no idea what he was doing or what he was up to. That's something that law enforcement officers do every day. Mm-hmm. They observe suspicious activity. They take note of violations of the law. That's fundamentally what police officers do. That's exactly what Eric and his partner did. They attempted to investigate it the best way they could. They certainly had reasonable suspicion. I would argue they had a probable cause at that point to engage Mr. Lamb. It's exactly what they did, and that's what police officers are trained to do. I know that's what Eric was trained to do. And so he did his job, and then he was presented with a life-threatening situation where he had to take action. That's exactly what he did. And so most of the cases that you see charged and ultimately convicted that involve law enforcement officers, and we see many of those cases, there's something about the case where the officer actually they deviated from what the standard of care is. They did something they weren't supposed to do, or they didn't do something they were supposed to do. I don't see any of that present in Eric's case, and that's what makes it so alarming. And then I'll just add briefly to that, Pete, the timing of this. So if you really look at the timing, this incident occurred in December of 2019. Okay, fast forward to May of 2020. That is when George Floyd died, obviously in a confrontation with Minneapolis police officers that all of your listeners are familiar with. 24 days later is when Eric is indicted by the Jackson County prosecutor. And so the timing, I mean, you can't look at this incident without looking at the timing and getting an understanding what's really driving it. And it's politics. It's reacting to politics. And I'll just put one more, if I have a second, I'll just add one more layer to that, is that, historically when criminal defendants, particularly police officers, select a judge trial where the judge is the trier of fact versus a jury, they do it because they expect that judges will be immune to the public pressure and will ignore it as professionals, as jurists, and that they will get a fair trial based solely on the evidence and ignoring any public pressure that may come to bear on the court. And unfortunately, and quite disappointingly, that just doesn't seem to be the case here.
It's not.
And not only here, but in other jurisdictions where we have similar cases, we're starting to see more pressure on courts, both trial courts and appellate courts. And that's really what's disappointing. And fundamentally, it brings into question our justice system ultimately.
Jason Johnson, president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Thank you for being here, Jason. We so appreciate the time.
Thank you for all your efforts here, Pete. I really appreciate it.